The departures hall at JFK throbbed with restless energy. Screens blinked with red delays and green on-time promises. Announcements boomed overhead, swallowed by the shuffle of hundreds of shoes across polished tile. In the middle of it all, Elena Carter clutched her son's hand and pulled their suitcase a few more feet forward in the slow-moving line. Her son, 5-year-old Jacob, looked small beneath the weight of his backpack. A stuffed bear's head poked out of the zipper. He stared at the bright departures board with wide eyes, his voice hopeful. "Is it our turn soon, Mom?" Elena smiled faintly, though her jaw ached from holding it tight. "Almost, sweetheart." She kept her other hand wrapped around the handle of their scuffed suitcase, the one she had carried since college. Its wheels caught on every seam in the tile. Her palms bore the faint marks of calluses that no cream could soften, reminders of double shifts and too many late nights cleaning offices after hours. When they reached the counter, Elena placed her envelope of cash and coins carefully in front of the airline clerk. She had counted it 3 times in the cab that morning. Rent paid, groceries rationed, every expense shaved down so she could make this flight. It wasn't just a trip. It was her chance to stand in court and make sure Jacob still had a home in Seattle. The clerk, a young man with neat hair and a weary patience, began counting. Quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies clinked one after another into the tray. Elena's stomach knotted tighter with each sound. Jacob leaned against her hip, resting his cheek on her coat sleeve, oblivious to the tension thickening around them. Finally, the clerk stopped. His lips pressed together, then parted with a sigh. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're short. $42.60. The word struck harder than she expected. Her chest tightened. She reached instinctively for her wallet, knowing it was already empty. "Please, can't you just hold the ticket? I'm afraid I can't print without full payment." His voice was gentle but final. He slid the coins back across the counter. Jacob's head lifted. His eyes searched her face. "Mom, are we not going home?" Elena's throat closed. She forced a steady breath. "We'll figure it out." Behind her, someone shifted impatiently. She felt the heat of a gaze, the kind that noticed her fraying coat, the worn shoes, the coins spread out like evidence of failure. She gathered the money with trembling hands, her fingers stiff from both cold and shame. Then a low voice cut through the noise. Calm, certain, "Add her ticket to mine." Elena froze. Slowly she turned. The man standing a step behind her was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple dark suit that managed to look both effortless and expensive. His presence seemed to quiet the air around him. He held out a sleek black card between 2 fingers. No hesitation, no ceremony, just an action, clean and final. The clerk straightened immediately. "Of course, sir." He swiped the card, tapping keys swiftly. Elena blinked, her breath catching. I can't let you." The man's gaze met hers briefly. Cool, unreadable, yet not unkind. "It's done." Jacob stared up at him, wide-eyed, as if this stranger had just performed a magic trick. Elena's lips parted to argue further, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her eyes, pressing her palm over her son's hair. When the clerk handed over the tickets, Elena accepted them with both hands. "Thank you," she whispered, voice unsteady. The man gave a single nod, already turning his attention back to the line. But in that brief moment, his eyes flicked downward, catching on the marks along her hand as it clutched the suitcase. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, from neutrality to something more distant. A thought. A memory. Then it was gone. Elena turned back toward the gate, Jacob tugging at her sleeve. She walked forward, ticket in hand, but her heart thudded louder than the rolling suitcase. She didn't even know his name. Still, his gesture lingered like a weight she could not set down. The boarding area was a swirl of voices and rolling suitcases. Families clustered in rows of plastic chairs, business travelers tapped furiously on laptops, and loudspeakers crackled with updates about delayed connections. Elena led Jacob to an empty pair of seats in the waiting area. Jacob gazed through the glass at the airplanes gliding smoothly along the runway, his fleeting excitement momentarily eclipsing the tension at the ticket counter. Elena lowered herself into the chair with a slow breath. Her fingers still trembled faintly as she smoothed the tickets across her lap. Relief mingled with unease. Gratitude for the stranger's help, but also the discomfort of owing something she could never repay. Jacob tugged her sleeve. "Mom, that's our plane, right? The one with the blue tail? She forced a smile. Yes, that's the one. We'll be on it soon. Her voice carried reassurance she didn't feel. Beneath her calm surface, her thoughts circled back to the man in line. The simple certainty in his voice, the way he dismissed the clerk's hesitation with a single sentence, "Add her ticket to mine." Who was he? The boarding call interrupted her thoughts. Passengers shuffled forward in a long, restless line. Elena gripped Jacob's hand and their worn suitcase. Step by step, they moved closer to the gate. As they handed over their tickets, Jacob turned to look behind them and froze. "Mom, it's him." Elena followed his gaze. Alexander Pierce was only a few passengers back, tall enough to rise above the crowd. His suit jacket was folded neatly over his arm, his expression unreadable as he waited his turn. Her pulse quickened. She turned forward again quickly, guiding Jacob down the jet bridge. The metallic hum of the tunnel echoed with each footstep. Inside the plane, Elena found their seats, a narrow pair near the wing. She helped Jacob into his seat, tucking his bear against his chest. The boy was already chattering softly about clouds and windows. Elena slid into the seat beside him, fastening her belt. She thought the moment at the counter was behind her, a brief act of kindness from a stranger she'd never see again. But as passengers continued to board, she felt it before she saw it. The shift in air, the awareness of presence. Alexander Pierce walked down the aisle. Without glancing sideways, he settled into a seat across from them, one row ahead, aisle side. Close enough that Elena could see the line of his jaw, the calm control in the way he placed his briefcase under the seat. Their eyes met for the briefest instant, hers uncertain, his steady, and then the flight attendant's voice filled the cabin, instructing passengers to switch off electronics. Elena turned to Jacob, stroking his hair as he leaned against her. But her thoughts were no longer on the safety instructions. The man who had just altered the course of her day sat only feet away, silent yet unavoidable. And she could not ignore the truth rising quietly in her chest. Their stories somehow had only just begun to intertwine. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane lifted off the runway, the city of New York shrinking into a scatter of orange dots beneath the wings. Elena held Jacob close, whispering to him about the clouds, the mountains they would see in Seattle, the home that still waited for them. At first, Jacob was restless with excitement, pressing his face against the window. But an hour into the flight, his energy faded. He leaned against Elena's arm, cheeks flushed, breath shallow and uneven. "Mommy, I'm tired," he murmured, his voice unusually weak. Elena touched his forehead, her heart clenched. His skin was hot, far too hot. Panic tightened her chest. She fumbled in her bag for a damp cloth, but all she had was a wrinkled tissue and a near-empty bottle of water. Jacob whimpered, curling into her side. "It hurts." Her hands shook as she poured the last drops of water onto the tissue, pressing it gently to his skin. It was nothing, barely a gesture, but it was all she could do. Across the aisle, Alexander Pierce had been reading a folder of documents. Now his gaze shifted. He noticed the boy's pallor, the desperation in Elena's movements. Slowly, he unfastened his seatbelt and leaned closer. "Excuse me," his voice was calm, low enough not to startle. "Your son? He has a fever?" Elena hesitated, torn between pride and fear. "He's just warm, I'll manage." But Jacob let out a soft moan, and the truth spoke louder than her words. Alexander pressed the call button. A flight attendant appeared, efficient but concerned. "Do you have a thermometer? Children's acetaminophen?" he asked with quiet authority. Within minutes, a small kid arrived. Alexander handed Elena a cool bottle of mineral water from his own carry-on, then steadied her hand as she coaxed Jacob to sip. His movements were practiced, almost instinctive. "Keep him hydrated," he said. "The medicine will help lower the fever." Elena looked at him, searching for something in his expression: judgment, pity, obligation. But his eyes held none of those, only focus. And beneath it, something harder to name: a quiet understanding. Jacob, lulled by his mother's touch and the slow rhythm of the plane, drifted into uneasy sleep. Elena brushed the damp hair from his forehead, whispering softly, her voice breaking with relief. "Thank you," she said finally, glancing at Alexander. "I don't know what I would have done." Alexander leaned back, his gaze returning to the folder for appearance's sake, though his voice carried something more personal when he answered, "No one should have to handle it alone." The engines hummed steadily. Outside, night stretched endless across the sky. Inside the cabin, 3 lives sat only feet apart, separate, yet already bound by a chain of moments too fragile, too human, to be dismissed as chance. The steady hum of the engines carried the hours forward. Elena kept her hand on Jacob's chest, counting every rise and fall. His fever had eased, thanks to the medicine, though he still stirred restlessly in his sleep. The captain's voice broke through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a technical issue, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Chicago. Please remain calm and follow crew instructions." A ripple of unease spread among passengers. Elena's stomach tightened. Jacob needed rest, not more disruption. She kissed his temple, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll be fine." The landing was rougher than usual, tires screeching against the runway. When the plane slowed, lights flickered, then steadied. People clapped nervously, grateful to be safe. Inside the terminal, chaos unfolded. Long lines, delayed connections, weary travelers. Elena carried Jacob in her arms, his small head heavy on her shoulder. She stopped at the service desk, where the agent announced, "All connecting flights are canceled until tomorrow morning. Vouchers for nearby hotels are limited. Families with small children will be prioritized." Elena searched her wallet. The math was cruelly simple. Even with a discounted voucher, she didn't have enough. Her lips trembled as she asked, "Is there somewhere we can stay inside the terminal? Just for the night?" The agent shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Overnight stays here aren't permitted. You'll need to arrange accommodations." Elena turned away, her legs weak. She spotted a row of metal seats against the wall, cold, hard, but free. She lowered Jacob carefully, brushing his hair back. His eyelids fluttered, confused. "Are we home?" he asked faintly. Her throat tightened. She forced a smile. "Not yet. Just rest, darling." A shadow fell across them. Alexander Pierce. He had no luggage in his hands, only that composed, unreadable expression. He glanced from Elena to the boy, then at the unyielding row of chairs. "This won't work," he said quietly. Elena straightened, her pride a fragile shield. "We'll manage. Thank you." Alexander paused, then spoke with the same calm authority he had used on the plane. "I'll cover a room. Let the boy sleep properly." Elena froze. Every instinct told her to refuse. She had spent years fending for herself, never relying on strangers. But Jacob's breathing was shallow, his small body curled against the metal armrest. She whispered, more to herself than to Alexander, "He just needs a bed." Alexander nodded once. "Exactly." For a long moment, she looked at him, the man who had appeared first at the ticket counter, then in the seat across the aisle, and now here, at her lowest point again. She saw no pity in his eyes, only a quiet insistence. Finally, Elena exhaled. "All right, just for tonight." Alexander gave a brief nod and gestured toward the hotel desk. As he walked ahead to arrange the room, Elena gathered Jacob in her arms again. This time, instead of resisting the help, she let herself accept it, if only for her son. The night in Chicago had only begun, but something had already shifted. The hotel lobby in Chicago was bright and polished, the kind of Elena would normally walk past without ever daring to step inside. The marble floor echoed under her worn shoes as she carried Jacob, his head resting heavily against her shoulder. Alexander handled the check-in with quiet efficiency, his card sliding across the counter without hesitation. Elena kept her distance, clutching her son tighter, feeling both gratitude and discomfort. She whispered to Jacob, "Just a bed, sweetheart. Then you'll feel better." A bellman offered to help with her bag, but she shook her head quickly. The old suitcase was light, half full at most, and she wasn't ready to let go of it. They rode the elevator in silence. Alexander stood tall, his reflection sharp in the mirrored walls, while Elena's eyes stayed fixed on the sleeping boy in her arms. When the doors opened, Alexander gestured toward the hallway. "Your room is here." Inside, the space was warm, with crisp white sheets and heavy curtains that shut out the noise of the city. Elena laid Jacob down carefully, tucking the blanket around him. His small hand reached instinctively for hers even in sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing out the exhaustion of the day. Alexander placed the room key on the table. "I've arranged it under your name. No one will disturb you." Elena looked up, uncertain how to bridge the space between gratitude and pride. "You've already done more than enough." His answer was calm but firm. "I saw a child who needed rest. That's reason enough. For the first time, she noticed something in his voice, a trace of weariness that didn't belong to a man untouched by hardship. Before she could respond, Jacob stirred, letting out a soft cough. Elena reached for him immediately, brushing his hair back. Alexander glanced at the boy, then quietly stepped toward the door. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be clearer. She wanted to argue, to explain, to ask why a man like him cared at all. But the words stuck. Instead, she simply nodded. As the door closed behind him, Elena sat in the dim light, her hand resting on Jacob's small chest. The sheet smelled faintly of lavender, the air warm and safe. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe they might make it through the night without fear. Yet in the hallway outside, Alexander lingered by the elevator, staring at the floor numbers glowing above. His jaw tightened, and in the silence he muttered to himself, "Not again." Morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, falling across the small figure curled beside Elena. Jacob's fever had eased, his breathing even, his lashes fluttering in sleep. Elena sat up slowly, the events of the previous day returning in fragments. The ticket, the plane, the kindness of a stranger who wasn't quite a stranger anymore. A quiet knock sounded at the door. She froze, instinctively protective, before opening it just a crack. Alexander stood there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a small brown bag. "I thought you might not have had dinner," he said simply, "or breakfast." Elena hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. He set the bag on the table, bagels and fruit, nothing extravagant, and placed 1 cup within her reach. "You didn't have to," she murmured, her pride pushing against her gratitude. "I know," he replied, taking the chair by the window. "But I did." The room was quiet except for Jacob's soft breaths. Elena unwrapped a bagel, breaking off a piece, her fingers trembling slightly. Finally, she asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." Alexander's gaze stayed on the city outside, the skyline half hidden by morning haze. "I know enough." He paused, choosing his words with care. "Yesterday at that counter, you reminded me of someone I lost. I couldn't help her. I can help you." The words hung between them, heavy but not intrusive. Elena studied him, noticing the stillness in his posture, the way his hand tightened around the coffee cup. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Whoever she was, I can see she mattered." He turned then, his expression steady but shadowed. "She did, and nothing more." Jacob stirred, sitting up groggily, rubbing his eyes. "Mom?" Elena leaned over, smoothing his hair. "It's okay, sweetheart, we're safe." She offered him a piece of bagel, and he took it with small hands, glancing curiously at Alexander. "Is he your friend?" Jacob asked with innocent directness. Elena's lips parted, uncertain. Alexander answered instead, his voice gentle in a way that startled her. "Maybe not yet, but I hope so." Jacob smiled faintly before returning to his breakfast. Elena looked at Alexander, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time, she didn't feel like she owed him a debt, only that they were sharing a fragile moment of honesty neither of them had expected. The night stretched quiet in the hotel. Jacob had finally drifted back to sleep after a mild cough, and Elena, drained, slipped into restless slumber on the sofa bed. A muffled voice pulled her awake. Not loud, controlled, deliberate, but carrying through the thin walls of the hallway. She rose, careful not to wake Jacob, and cracked the door. Alexander stood at the far end of the corridor, phone pressed to his ear, his tall frame outlined against the dim exit light. His tone was low, but every word carried weight. "No, I couldn't save her. I did everything. Doctors, treatments, money, it didn't matter. She's gone, and I live with that every day." Elena froze. The words struck with a raw honesty she hadn't expected from a man so composed. Silence on the line, then his voice again, quieter, breaking. "Maybe this time I can do something right. Maybe helping them helps me breathe again." Her chest tightened. She shouldn't be hearing this. She knew it, but she couldn't move, caught in the ache of his confession. Alexander ended the call, sliding the phone into his pocket. For a long moment he just stood there, shoulders heavy, before turning back down the hall. Elena closed the door gently, heart racing. She looked at Jacob sleeping peacefully, then back at the door. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just kindness from a stranger. This was a man carrying grief, trying, somehow, to atone. And though she didn't fully understand why their paths had crossed, she knew this. They were no longer just passengers on the same flight. Their lives had begun to intertwine in ways neither of them had chosen, but neither could ignore. The following morning, the hotel lobby was a blur of travelers dragging suitcases, voices overlapping, announcements echoing from the television. Elena guided Jacob by the hand, her old suitcase wobbling behind. She had planned to catch the first available flight out of Chicago. All she wanted was to reach Seattle before the hearing with her ex-husband. Alexander waited by the concierge desk, already speaking with the clerk. His presence, steady and composed, stood out against the noise. When he saw Elena, his voice softened. "They canceled the morning flights," he said. "Mechanical delays. The next confirmed seat to Seattle is late tonight." Elena's shoulders sank. "Late tonight?" Her eyes moved to Jacob, who leaned against her side, clearly tired. "That doesn't leave much time before the hearing." Alexander hesitated, then offered, "I can get you on an earlier connection, private charter, leaving in 2 hours." The words landed heavier than he seemed to intend. Elena's instinct pushed back. "Private? I can't afford anything like that." "I didn't ask you to pay," Alexander replied evenly. "It's already arranged. 1 seat for me, 2 for you." Elena shook her head. "I can't keep accepting." "You can," he interrupted, his tone firmer than before but not unkind, "because it isn't about debt, it's about getting you home on time." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The weight of pride and gratitude pressed against each other in Elena's chest. Jacob looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, can we go? I don't like waiting in airports." Elena exhaled, steadying herself. "Fine," she said softly, "but only because of him." She rested a hand on Jacob's shoulder. Alexander gave a brief nod, not triumphant, just resolved. As they stepped outside, Chicago's wind cut sharp and cold. A sleek black car waited at the curb, driver in uniform holding the door. Elena felt the pull of unease again, worlds colliding, hers and his, but Jacob tugged her forward, eager to climb inside. The ride to the smaller airfield was quiet. Elena stared out the window, the city receding into open stretches of snow-dusted ground. Alexander sat across from her, hands folded, gaze distant. Finally she asked, "Why Seattle? Why were you on that flight in the first place?" He met her eyes, measured, as though weighing what to reveal. "Business, and something overdue." His pause was deliberate. "But now, I think being on that flight wasn't chance at all." Elena turned back to the window, unsettled yet unable to dismiss the feeling. Something about his words, his presence, the invisible ties of grief and necessity, everything was pulling them into the same current, and neither of them knew where it would carry them next. The private jet touched down smoothly in Seattle, dusk painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. Elena tightened her grip on Jacob's hand as they stepped onto the tarmac, the cool air biting sharper than Chicago's. She hadn't been home in months, and yet the city greeted her with a weight she wasn't ready to carry. Her phone buzzed before they reached the terminal. Unknown number. She answered with hesitation. "Elena Carter?" The voice was clipped, official. "This is Clerk Jensen from the county courthouse. I need to inform you, new documents were filed this morning by James Carter. He's petitioned for sole ownership of your house." Elena's breath caught. "That's impossible. The house is in both names." "Not according to the affidavit he submitted," Jensen interrupted. "There are signed statements and bank papers claiming you relinquished rights before the divorce. Unless contested, the judge will review them as valid evidence." The ground seemed to shift beneath her. "That's a lie. Those signatures, they're not mine." "I suggest you bring legal counsel to tomorrow's hearing," Jensen replied firmly. "Good evening, ma'am." The call ended. Elena lowered the phone slowly, her pulse hammering in her ears. Jacob tugged at her sleeve. "Mom? What's wrong?" She crouched, brushing his hair back with trembling fingers. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart." But her voice betrayed her fear. Alexander, waiting a few steps ahead, noticed instantly. What happened? Elena wanted to dismiss it, to hide her shame, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Steady, direct, leaving no room for pretense. "My ex-husband," she forced out. "He's trying to steal the house. He forged documents. If the court believes him, Jacob and I will have nowhere to live." For a moment Alexander said nothing. His jaw tightened, his gaze fixed beyond her, as though calculating something only he could see. Then, with quiet resolve, he pulled a card from his wallet and pressed it into her hand. "My attorney," he said, "the best in the state. Call him tonight. You're not walking into that courtroom alone. Elena shook her head instinctively. I can't owe you more. This isn't charity. This is my life. If I accept, I'll never be free of your name. Alexander's voice dropped, steady and low. This isn't about my name. It's about your son having a roof over his head. Don't think of it as debt. Think of it as redemption. The word lingered, echoing the same tone he had used on the phone the night before. Elena's chest tightened, torn between mistrust, gratitude, and something she wasn't ready to name. Behind her, Jacob slipped his small hand into Alexander's larger one, unafraid. Will you help us, mister? Alexander looked down at the boy, so direct, so innocent, and then back at Elena. His answer was quiet, but absolute. Yes, I will. The Seattle skyline glimmered through the taxi window, but Elena barely saw it. Her mind replayed the courthouse clerk's words like a broken record. Fraudulent documents, forged signatures, sole ownership. She sat rigid in the back seat, Jacob asleep against her arm, his head heavy on her shoulder. Alexander sat opposite, his expression unreadable, the city lights slicing across his features. At last, he spoke. I've already contacted my attorney. He'll meet us first thing in the morning. Elena's grip tightened around her purse. I told you. I don't want to be indebted to you. His gaze lifted to hers. This isn't about debt. It's about fighting fire with fire. James has money, influence. You'll need more than truth to win. You'll need someone who knows how the system bends. Elena bit her lip, torn. She hated the idea of accepting more help. Yet when she glanced down at Jacob, his small chest rising and falling in sleep, the choice was clear. I'll meet him, she whispered. The cab pulled up to a modest hotel near downtown. Not the kind Alexander would normally choose, but he seemed to understand Elena's resistance to extravagance. Inside the room, Elena tucked Jacob into bed, brushing his hair back with a tenderness that masked her dread. She turned to find Alexander by the window, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but firm. Yes, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring everything. Financial records, handwriting experts, prior case precedents. No mistakes. He ended the call and caught Elena watching him. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of city traffic. You sound like a man preparing for war, she said softly. His lips curved into a faint, grim smile. That's exactly what it is. Elena crossed her arms, studying him. Why are you doing this, Alexander? Really? You don't know me. You don't owe me. His eyes darkened, the weight of his past flickering there. Because once I stood by while someone I loved begged for help, and I did nothing. I won't make that mistake again. The words sank deep, echoing with a pain she couldn't yet fully understand. For the first time, Elena allowed her defenses to falter. Then tomorrow, we fight together. Alexander inclined his head, the agreement sealed not by words, but by the unspoken understanding of two wounded lives intersecting at a critical crossroad. As night fell over Seattle, the stage was set. The next sunrise would not just bring a hearing. It would bring reckoning. Morning light filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long beams across the polished wood benches. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table, Jacob with Mrs. Hanley, the family friend, in the back row. She smoothed her skirt, hands trembling despite her effort to appear calm. James Carter sat opposite. His suit was expensive, his hair perfectly styled, but his smirk was the same one that once left her powerless. Beside him, his lawyer whispered strategy, a folder of fabricated documents stacked high. Elena's stomach twisted. Then the door opened. Alexander entered with his attorney, a tall man with sharp eyes named David Lane. The room shifted. The quiet authority of wealth and power seemed to follow him. But instead of looking toward James, Alexander's gaze found Elena. He gave the smallest of nods, a silent reminder, you're not alone. The judge entered, and the clerk called the case. Papers shuffled, the air heavy with anticipation. James's lawyer opened first, confident. He presented deeds with Elena's forged signature, claiming she had willingly signed away her share of the house. James leaned back, smug, as if the outcome were already decided. Elena's pulse raced. She wanted to shout, to protest, but her lawyer placed a steadying hand on her arm. Wait, David whispered. When it was their turn, David stood. His voice was calm, measured. Your Honor, these documents may look official, but they are not. We have handwriting analysis confirming the signature was forged. We also have bank records showing withdrawals made without Mrs. Carter's knowledge. And most importantly, he paused, pulling out a smaller file. Alexander's gaze sharpened. We have evidence linking Mr. Carter to a pattern of financial misconduct in prior business dealings. He is not simply trying to take a home. He is attempting fraud on a larger scale. The courtroom buzzed. James's face flushed. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering frantically. The judge adjusted her glasses. I will review these materials carefully, but the weight of this evidence is significant. Elena exhaled for the first time that morning. The documents were on her side now. But the battle wasn't over. She still had to speak. The judge looked directly at her. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to address the court? Every eye turned to her. Her throat felt dry, her knees weak. She rose slowly, heart pounding. Alexander's steady gaze anchored her, his presence a quiet reassurance at her back. For the first time in years, Elena faced James not as his abandoned wife, but as a mother fighting for her child's future. And she began to speak. The courtroom was silent. Every sound, rustling papers, squeaking shoes, seemed to vanish as Elena stood. She gripped the wooden edge of the table to steady herself, her voice wavering at first but gaining strength. Your Honor, 5 years ago I trusted James Carter with everything I had, my savings, my home, my future. He left me when I was 7 months pregnant, and since then I've raised our son alone. Every dollar I've earned went to keeping a roof over our heads. She glanced back at Jacob, sitting beside Mrs. Hanley in the gallery. His wide eyes gave her courage. What you see in these forged documents isn't just an attempt to steal a house. It's an attempt to erase the only safe place my child has ever known. This home is more than property. It is stability. It is dignity. It is proof that we survived. James shifted uncomfortably, but she pressed on. I know what it feels like to count coins for baby formula. I know what it's like to choose between paying a bill and buying medicine. And yet, I never once asked James for help. He abandoned us, and now he returns not with support, but with deception. Her eyes flicked toward Alexander briefly. He gave a slight nod, steady and affirming. I am not asking for sympathy, she continued. I am asking for truth. And the truth is that these papers are lies. My son deserves better than lies, and I deserve to protect what little we have fought for. Her final words hung in the air. Even the judge leaned forward slightly as though absorbing every syllable. When Elena sat down, her hands were trembling, but her heart was steady. The judge cleared her throat. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. The sincerity of your statement has been noted. This court will consider both the evidence and your testimony with utmost seriousness. For the first time in years, Elena felt she had truly spoken with her own voice. And this time, James had no power to silence her. James rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but James waved him off, stepping forward with a defiant sneer. Your Honor, he said, voice sharp, my ex-wife is playing on sympathy. She's dramatizing her struggles to distract from the fact that she cannot financially maintain the property in question. I can. That is the difference. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Elena's jaw clenched, but she forced herself to remain still. David Lane adjusted his glasses calmly. Permission to respond, Your Honor? The judge nodded. Mr. Carter claims financial superiority, David began, holding up a folder. But records from his bank accounts show consistent overdrafts. Furthermore, he laid down another paper. His signature on the mortgage transfer documents does not match verified signatures from prior transactions. Independent handwriting analysis confirms this. The judge studied the evidence silently. James's face reddened. Forgery? That's absurd. But before he could finish, David slid forward a final sheet. Additionally, Mr. Carter filed these papers through a shell company registered under Montrose Holdings. This company has previously been flagged in financial investigations tied to predatory acquisitions. The room tensed. Even the judge's expression hardened. Elena looked at James, once the man she had trusted with her life, and felt no fear now, only clarity. The judge turned to James. Mr. Carter, this is serious. Do you have an explanation for these irregularities? James stammered, sweat forming at his temple. His lawyer tried to interject, but the damage was done. From the gallery, Jacob's small voice carried, Mommy, are we keeping our house? The innocence pierced the silence. Elena's throat tightened, but she smiled at her son and nodded gently. The judge banged the gavel. Order. Then she leaned forward. This court will recess before rendering judgment. But let me be clear, the evidence presented places Mr. Carter's credibility in grave doubt. As the gavel echoed, James turned, glaring at Elena with thinly veiled rage. And Alexander, silent until now, finally stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Elena's chair. His voice was low but firm, meant for James alone. "She's not alone anymore." James froze at the weight of those words. For the first time, his bluster faltered. The courtroom buzzed as the judge called a recess. James slumped back in his chair, his bravado stripped away. Elena bent to gather Jacob's crayons from the bench, her heart pounding, trying to steady herself after the storm of testimony. David Lane stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There is one more point we haven't addressed yet. It's delicate." Elena looked up, wary. "What is it?" David flipped open a folder, the crisp pages whispering as he turned. The property transfer James attempted was processed through a holding company. Name, Pierce Financial Holdings. The words hit the air like a stone dropped in water. Elena froze. Her eyes snapped instinctively toward Alexander. He had not spoken, but the stillness of his posture gave him away. His hand, resting on the back of her chair, curled ever so slightly into a fist. "Pierce," Elena whispered, her voice catching. David glanced between them, realizing she had already connected the dots. Yes, the company was founded 2 decades ago by Richard Pierce, Alexander's father. It was later consolidated under Alexander after his passing. The explanation spread clarity through the room. Elena hadn't guessed blindly. She had once pored over every bill, every insurance denial letter after her mother's illness. The name Pierce Financial Holdings had been stamped across them like a shadow she could never escape. That night in the hospital, when her mother's treatment was cut short, the letter had come under that very header. She had folded it, crumpled it, but the name was branded into her memory. And now, he was here. The same Alexander Pierce who had stepped forward with quiet kindness at an airport counter. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she could barely breathe. "You," she whispered, unable to mask the tremor. Alexander's jaw tightened, his eyes met hers, full of the weight he had carried. He didn't deny it. "Elena," he said softly, his voice stripped of all the polish he usually carried. "I need to explain." But Elena pulled her hand back from his reach, her breath shallow. "You don't have to," she said, though her voice betrayed the storm inside. "I already know." David closed the folder gently, sensing this was no longer about legal arguments. This was personal, a revelation years in the making. In the gallery, Jacob tugged Elena's sleeve. "Mommy, why are you looking at him like that?" Elena swallowed hard, brushing Jacob's hair tenderly. "Because sometimes the people who help us now were part of the hurt before." The words hung heavy, honest, and raw. Alexander lowered his gaze. For the first time since she met him, Elena saw not the billionaire who had stepped in at JFK, but a man carrying scars as deep as hers. The recess ended with the gavel's sharp crack, but Elena knew the trial inside the courtroom was nothing compared to the reckoning waiting in her heart. The gavel struck 3 times, calling the courtroom back to order. The air felt heavy, charged with everything unspoken. Elena sat rigid, Jacob's small hand wrapped in hers, while Alexander remained a quiet figure at her side. The judge adjusted his glasses. After reviewing the evidence, fraudulent signatures, fabricated documents, and testimony provided, "I hereby rule in favor of Miss Elena Carter. The petition to transfer property is denied. Full ownership of the house remains with Miss Carter." The words landed like a release of breath she had held for years. Elena closed her eyes. Relief surged, but so did exhaustion. Jacob squeezed her hand. "Mom, we can go home?" "Yes, sweetheart," Elena whispered, kissing the crown of his head. "We can go home." Across the aisle, James stood pale and cornered, his attorney whispering urgently but in vain. His eyes darted toward Elena, part anger, part regret, but she no longer flinched. For the first time, his power over her was gone. As people began to file out, David leaned forward. "It's over, Elena. You did it." But before she could answer, Alexander spoke, his voice low, unsteady. "No, not yet." Elena turned to him, her expression guarded. The name Pierce Financial Holdings still echoed in her chest like an old wound reopened. Alexander stood, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, may I request a moment on record?" The judge, surprised, allowed it. Alexander stepped into the well of the courtroom. For a man known for his composure, his hands trembled slightly as he faced Elena. "I owe her," And this court, the truth. My family's company, Pierce Financial Holdings, was once responsible for decisions that denied treatment to patients who couldn't meet insurance terms. One of those patients was Elena's mother. I cannot undo what happened, but I can take responsibility now. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge frowned. Mr. Pierce, this is not required for the case at hand. I know, Alexander said, his voice thickened, but it's required for me. Elena's eyes glistened. She hadn't expected him to stand in front of everyone and expose the wound she thought he would forever hide. She rose slowly. Alexander, he turned to her. I don't ask forgiveness. I ask for a chance to help repair what should never have been broken. For you, for Jacob, for anyone who has ever been left without dignity. The silence that followed was profound. Even James seemed forgotten in that moment. Elena's throat tightened. She thought of the hospital corridors, of her mother's fading smile, of the letters stamped with Pierce Financial Holdings. And she thought of Jacob's laugh, Alexander's steady hand on her son's shoulder, the moments of humanity he had shown when no one else had. Her voice was quiet but clear. Then don't help me out of guilt, Alexander. Help so no one else has to beg for a chance to live with dignity. A single tear slid down his face. He bowed his head. I will. The gavel struck again, closing the case. But for Elena, the true verdict had already been delivered. Justice, yes, but also something deeper. A recognition of pain, a bridge toward healing. As they stepped out of the courthouse, the cold Seattle air rushed over them. Reporters gathered, but Alexander shielded Elena and Jacob with his coat, guiding them past the flashing cameras. On the courthouse steps, Jacob tugged Alexander's hand with childlike certainty. Can you come home with us? Elena started to protest, but Alexander simply smiled down at the boy. If your mom says yes. Elena met his gaze. For the first time, she saw not just the man tied to her past, but the man choosing a different future. She nodded. Yes. And together, they walked down the steps, mother, child, and billionaire, toward a horizon where redemption and second chances waited. And so Elena, Jacob, and Alexander stepped into a new chapter, one built on healing, dignity, and second chances. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If this journey moved you, please like and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories every day.